Good evening, everybody. So tonight I'm going to be joined by a licensed journeyman electrician, and he's going to be talking to us about electrical safety and why it's always is smart that you hire a licensed electrician to do the work for you. Now, I'm an electrician's apprentice, and there's been a lot of videos that I've seen on YouTube that are just not correct. And a lot of people attempt to do electrical work on their own. My advice to you is to never do electrical work on your own. You always want to hire a licensed electrician, no matter what the case may be. Whether it's just as simple as an outlet, you always want to hire a licensed electrician. I mean, that's the bottom line. So, without further ado, I now introduce Mr. Larry Hall. Alright, guys, so I'm here with Mr. Larry Hall, and the first question is, why should a licensed electrician always do the electrical work?
Well, that's a very good question, Dave. I actually had a conversation with another guy on a job I was working on today about that same thing. And he actually stated to me that even though he's seen the basics of what we do in this trade for a living, that he's actually a little nervous about doing it himself because he's afraid he might burn his house down. And I actually told him I applaud him for taking that stance because the electrical trade is a lot more than just running wires and cables from point A to point B and making up connections. And we spend a lot of time training in the classroom and in the field in order to get licensed to do this. And this trade, to be honest with you, is, for lack of a better term, not a hobby. So,
And just a follow-up question. How many years of training does it take to become an electrician?
Well, that varies from state to state. And in Massachusetts, it takes 8,000 hours of time spent in the field under someone who is licensed, along with 600 hours of classroom training. That's the minimum that you have to have in order to be able to sit for the journeyman's exam.
Wow. All right. And
which takes about 4 years.
About 4 years. Okay.
If you have assuming you have no gaps in employment, case in point being laid off. And a lot of times that is actually I don't know how it is in your area, but in my area that does tend to be fairly common with apprentices. When work slows down, the apprentices are usually the first to go.
I got you. All right, and now next question: what's your opinion on all the DIY electrical videos on YouTube?
Well, I haven't had a chance to watch too many of them, and I have seen a lot of carefully planned out and executed DIY videos. And number one, most of them I actually do give some credit to because they seem to have a pretty good working knowledge of it. But once again, I still can't really condone or advise anyone to do that kind of work themselves because, like I said, this trade is not a hobby. So, and if done incorrectly, then you could not only be putting yourself at risk, but you could be putting others at risk too, depending on what type of structure you're working in.
Now, what are the consequences of doing electrical work yourself and something goes wrong?
Well, there's a lot of things that can go wrong on that too. Not so much starting a fire, but also things. I mean, that would be the worst case scenario. And best case scenario, you have something that doesn't work. But also, if you're working with something and forget to shut off the power, you could easily electrocute yourself, or you could actually suffer burns from if something arcs out and explodes in your face.
Oh wow!
And so there are hazards involved with it too. And we're trained on how to deal with them and how to mitigate them as well. And most of the time, we shut off the power before we're working on it, and also use some good testing equipment to make sure that the circuit is off before you start opening up stuff and making connections. Now, there are some situations, like if you're troubleshooting, for example, where you have to keep the power on. So that's where you take other precautions, like working slowly and carefully, and sometimes, in some cases, wearing some good rubber gloves to insulate yourself, just in case you come into contact with a live part.
Now, do you recommend any homeowner whatsoever to do electrical work on their own?
Absolutely not.
You hear that, guys? Absolutely not. And why is that? Obviously, we know why. But what?
And I did state that earlier, but I will reiterate:
Please
this
do.
trade is not a hobby. It is actually a trade, and we trained for years in order to get licensed to do this thing.
So, guys, you just heard it from a professional. A licensed journeyman electrician just told you that. And guys, this is, I mean, it's really not a joke at all. I mean, some people think it's a joke. And as Larry, I was talking with Larry the other day, there's more to being an electrician than just connecting white and black to black.
There is a lot more to it, too, especially when it comes to more. I mean, I'm not really going to get into too much detail, but there are situations that require a lot of expertise as far as planning how you're going to execute this is concerned as well. Say, for example, on the incoming service to a building, or what type of size of circuit you need to feed a given situation. There are calculations that have to be done for what size wire you need, how far, and depending on how far it's going to run. If it's going to be more than a certain distance, you could have a voltage drop if it's a heavy load. And also, the biggest thing too is, I'll also say that a lot of electricians tend to be all thumbs with it, but it is one of my areas of expertise, and it's one that's kind of how I met Dave, and it's when it comes to fire alarm systems. Fire alarm systems are pretty much my bread and butter, but in my area, you actually do need a license to do them as well, and that is governed by the electrical board. So the way I pursued a journeyman's license, because if I need a license to do any kind of wiring, I might as well be able to do it all.
There you go. And then one last question, and I'm sure there will be questions in the comments, and if it's okay with you, maybe sometime we can do a follow-up video. If somebody has knob and tube in their home, or they need to upgrade their service, so let's say from a 100 amp to a 200 amp, or they need to rewire the house, what are the steps that they should take?
Well, first off, if you're upgrading a service, you definitely need to contact the utility company for that as well, because they may have to make a provision to increase the feed going to your house, and for the size of if it's an overhead drop, or if it's even an underground run too, that may have to be increased in size as well, because those are only rated to handle so much current as well. So if you increase the size of your service itself, it's going to put more load on those conductors, so they may have to be made bigger as well. And also, if you're going to do, anybody wiring a house, if not the homeowner, in my area, that also requires pulling permits.
And hopefully it's not the homeowner doing it.
And also, pulling permits also requires that you also have inspections afterward as well, to make sure that everything's up to snuff. And when wiring a house, there are multiple stages in my area as well. You not only have to submit, there are not only permits involved, but in some localities they actually require you to submit floor plans as well, showing where everything is. Particularly this one town in my area actually requires kitchen layout plans.
Really?
For how the kitchen is laid out.
Oh, wow.
That's a local town requirement. And when you submit and usually they don't actually submit, you don't have to submit them when pulling the permit. You have to submit them when requesting the rough inspection, which is when all the wires are in place in the box and everything's cut into the boxes before the walls get closed up. That's what's called the rough wiring inspection. And then after everything's all put together, all the plates and everything are on, and all the power's on, all circuits are tested and everything, then you have a final inspection where the inspector comes in, checks everything out, and signs off on it if you're good to go. Now, when you're doing a service, then you would have to have a service inspection as well. That also involves work with the utility company. Some utility companies require what's called a work order that you contact them for, and once the inspector approves the service, they call into the utility company and say, okay, this service at this address is ready for you to energize. And then the utility company will set up a date and time to come out, energize the service, put the electric meter in, and then you have power in the house.
And just a follow-up question, does an electrical inspector need to have an electrician's license?
In my state, yes.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. Alright guys, well, a big thanks to Larry Hall for spending the time with us to discuss electrical safety. If you have any questions at all regarding electricity, it would be best that those questions go toward Larry, because I'm nowhere near a professional. But you can comment down below, and I will be sure to ask those questions to Larry, and we can hopefully make a follow-up video pretty soon in the near future. So Larry, thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you for having me, Dave.
Thanks. Alright guys, we'll talk to you later. Thank you.